Under the burning sun of the western plains, the air shimmered with heat and dust, the kind that clings to a man's soul. The small town of Cedar Hollow was half asleep that morning, except for the sound of boots echoing on dry earth and whispers traveling from porch to porch. The reason for the buzz stood outside the saloon, a woman dressed in black, her hat tilted low, her eyes cold but strong. Her name was Martha Kane, though everyone just called her the widow. She had been alone ever since Sheriff Kane, the bravest man the town had ever known, was gunned down by outlaws 3 years back. The only thing he left her was a piece of land, a barn full of dust, and one creature that even the devil himself might have feared, a black stallion named Ghostfire. The horse had been a gift from the sheriff's best friend, raised wild and fierce, a beast born from thunder and shadow. But since Kane's death, no one had been able to ride it. The stallion had turned mean, untamable, throwing anyone who dared touch the saddle. Rumor spread that the horse carried the sheriff's restless spirit, and anyone trying to mount it would be punished for their arrogance. Yet, on this day, Martha's patience had reached its end. With steady hands, she nailed a poster to the wooden post outside the saloon. Her hammer struck with a sound that echoed across the square, clack, 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 like the rhythm of fate. The poster read, $1,000 to any man who can ride my stallion. The letters were bold, written in her own hand. Within hours, cowboys began riding in from every corner of the desert, gamblers, drifters, even a few lawmen looking for glory. They gathered in front of her ranch, boasting, laughing, some whispering prayers under their breath. The widow stood silently by the corral, her face like carved stone. She watched as one by one, men climbed into Ghostfire's saddle, and one by one, they were thrown to the ground like rag dolls. Dust flew, curses filled the air, and every time someone hit the dirt, Ghostfire reared up, wild and proud, as if to say, not you. Not ever. By sunset, 25 men had tried and failed. The townsfolk drifted away, muttering that the horse was cursed and that the widow had gone mad with grief. But she didn't move. She stood by the fence, watching the stallion pace back and forth, his black mane whipping in the wind, his breath like smoke in the dying light. Somewhere deep down, she wasn't angry. She was waiting for someone different. When the last bit of daylight began to fade, a new figure appeared on the dusty horizon. A lone rider approached slowly, his shadow long and silent. His horse was thin, tired, and his clothes were worn and coated in sand. He didn't carry much, no badges, no gold, not even a proper saddlebag. Just a guitar strapped to his back and a hat that looked older than the town itself. The people who still lingered by the saloon turned to watch him. He stopped in front of the poster, reading the challenge without a word. Then, with a quiet smirk, he said softly, $1,000, huh? Guess it's worth a try. The widow, standing on the porch, narrowed her eyes. You think you can ride Ghostfire when 25 men already ate dust trying? The man looked up at her, his voice low but steady. Ma'am, I ain't here for your money. I'm here to see if that horse still remembers mercy. A murmur rippled through the few remaining onlookers. The widow hesitated. There was something in his tone, calm, not proud. Something she hadn't heard in years. Her husband used to speak that way, before the gunfire and the blood. What's your name, stranger? She asked. Names are for folks who plan to stay, he replied, tying his horse to the post. Me, I just keep moving. That night, the whole town couldn't talk about anything else. The drifter, the man with no name, was going to ride Ghostfire at sunrise. Some said he'd be dead before breakfast. Others said maybe the devil himself was riding into town. When dawn came, the corral was packed. Men stood on fences, women held their children close, even the preacher showed up just in case someone needed burying. The widow stood near the gate, her eyes hidden behind her hat brim. Ghostfire kicked and snorted, his breath steaming in the cold morning air. He was magnificent, dark as midnight, eyes glowing with fire, muscles coiled and ready to explode. The stranger stepped forward, every movement slow and deliberate. He didn't carry a whip or a rope, just that same old calm that seemed to wrap around him like a second skin. He approached Ghostfire, speaking in a voice too low for anyone to hear. The stallion pawed the ground, ears twitching. Everyone expected him to rear, to throw dirt, to scream like he always did. But he didn't. He stood still. The stranger raised a hand and touched the horse's neck. It was the first time in 3 years that anyone had laid a hand on Ghostfire without being bitten or kicked. The air went silent. Even the birds stopped moving. Slowly, the cowboy put one boot in the stirrup, then the other, and climbed into the saddle. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Ghostfire bolted. The corral gate burst open, dust exploding into the air as horse and rider vanished across the plains. The crowd gasped. The widow's hand flew to her chest. The world seemed to hold its breath. They rode like lightning, over dry creeks, across open fields, through the golden sea of prairie grass. Ghostfire's mane whipped back like a flame. But the cowboy didn't fight him. He didn't pull the reins or force control. He let the horse run, wild and free, letting the rage burn itself out. The stallion ran until there was nothing left to fight, only the sound of the wind and the beat of two hearts moving as one. When they returned hours later, the cowboy's hat was gone, his face covered in dust, but his eyes were alive, bright, fierce, and full of peace. Ghostfire walked beside him, calm as a lamb. The crowd erupted in cheers. For the first time, the widow's lips trembled. Tears rolled down her cheeks. He stopped in front of her and slid off the saddle. For a moment, they just stood there, the man, the woman, and the horse. 3 souls that had been broken by life, now bound together by something wordless. Martha reached into her coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. "You earned it," she said, her voice trembling. "No man's ever done what you did." But the cowboy shook his head. "Keep it, ma'am. Money ain't what I came for." "Then what did you come for?" she asked quietly. He looked at Ghostfire, who was nuzzling her hand gently now. "Just to remind him," he said, "that not all men mean harm. Sometimes, you just gotta listen instead of conquer." For a moment, the world felt still. The wind softened. The widow wiped her eyes, realizing that what she'd been guarding all these years, her pain, her anger, her memories, had kept her as trapped as the horse. She smiled weakly and whispered, "You sound like my husband." The cowboy tipped his hat. "Maybe he left a bit of his spirit behind, in that horse, and in you." He turned to walk away, his boots stirring the dust. The townsfolk watched silently as he saddled his tired horse. Martha called out after him, "At least tell me your name." He paused, then smiled over his shoulder. "Names don't matter much out here, ma'am. Just stories." And with that, he rode off into the setting sun, his silhouette slowly blending with the horizon. The crowd began to disperse, but the widow stayed by the fence, her eyes following him until he disappeared beyond the hills. Days passed. The story spread like wildfire. People came from miles away to see the widow's stallion, the horse that finally bowed his head for one man. But what they found instead was something far gentler. Martha had started riding Ghostfire herself, just like her husband once did. She rode through the fields at dawn, her black dress replaced by a dusty blue coat, her laughter echoing across the plains. For the first time in years, Cedar Hollow saw her smile. The poster stayed nailed to the barn wall, but she changed one line. The bold challenge that once read, $1,000 to any man who can ride my stallion, now said, "If you're a real cowboy, prove it, not with fear, but with kindness." And somewhere beyond the desert, that nameless drifter kept riding, chasing sunsets, carrying stories that only the wind would ever know. Some said he was a ghost himself, sent by fate to heal what was broken. Others said he was just another man passing through. But those who saw him swore they could still see the dust trail of his horse glowing in the evening light, like fire moving across the earth. In Cedar Hollow, mothers told their children his story before bed, and cowboys whispered his name around campfires. No one knew where he came from or where he went, but they all agreed on one thing. He was the only man who ever rode the widow's stallion, and rode straight into legend. As the years rolled by, Martha grew old, her hair turning silver, her voice softer. Yet, every sunset, she'd walk out to the fence, looking toward the horizon where the sky burned orange and red. She'd whisper a quiet thank you to the wind, for the stranger, the horse, and the lesson they'd both left behind. Because out there, under the endless western sky, she'd learned the truth that every cowboy must face: the wildest hearts can never be broken by force, only by love. And so, in the hush of twilight, as Ghostfire grazed quietly beside her, the legend of the lonely cowboy lived on, not in gold, not in fame, but in the soft beating of the earth beneath his horse's hooves, and the whisper of every wind that passed through Cedar Hollow, carrying his story toward the horizon.